is Mary Brady. I am a master's student at the University of Nevada in Reno, and today I will be presenting about some of my thesis research, looking specifically at soil temperature during wildfire, how we can take these measurements, and some different ways to use them. As most of you are probably aware, there has been increasing wildfire activity here in the American West for the last few decades. Just this last month, we had a whole series of large, devastating fires, which are hard to control. But as heartbreaking as these fires can be from a human perspective, these fires also have complex roles and effects in our ecosystems, which we don't fully understand yet. In particular, there are many questions about how fire affects soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. And it's important that we ask these questions right now in the context of global change because soils are one of the largest terrestrial pools of carbon. So understanding how fires are going to interact with that is going to become increasingly important. Current fire research is done mostly in laboratories and on prescribed fires. This has a few advantages. On prescribed fires, you can get really solid pre- and post-fire measurements that allow researchers to look specifically at what the fire is doing. But unfortunately, wildfires are different on a couple different fronts. The first is that wildfires are typically larger, have more areas of high severity, and more variable fire behavior than anything you'll see on a prescribed fire. So we can't just take the things we learn on prescribed fires and copy and paste them directly to wildfires. We need to study them differently. And the second major difference with studying wildfires is that it's really hard to get pre-fire data because these events are not planned. They happen on their own schedule. So most studies use space for time comparisons to replace pre-fire data. That's where you find a nearby area that did not burn and use that as a stand-in for pre-fire data. But this comes with its own host of risks and assumptions that may or may not always be true. This is where the Forest Service Fire Behavior Assessment Team, or FBAT, comes in. FBAT is a group of Fireline certified researchers that collect pre- and post-fire data on active wildfires. They have unique access to these events that allows them to collect some really cool data. I'm working with them looking specifically at soil heating data in order to build a model for how soil heats during wildfires. And then using that model to look at below ground carbon, nitrogen, and microbial biomass dynamics post-fire. FBAT takes soil temperature measurements using a device called an I-button stake. That's what you see here pictured on the right. It is just a normal wooden stake that has 3 I-button sensors installed in it. That's the 3 silver discs there in the photo. These I-button sensors are both the temperature sensor and the data logger in one. So this isn't like thermocouples where you've got wires going all over the place. This is the entire device here. To use this in the field, all you do is place the stake fully in the ground, and that will place the sensors at their pre-measured depths. With FBAT, you measure 5, 10, and 15 centimeters below the soil surface. This method is nice because it's very quick and easy, but it also causes minimal disturbance to the soil. So the soil profile and the soil structure are left mostly intact as compared to measurement methods where you have to dig up the soil to be able to bury sensors. So this is a pretty nice system that you can use on wildfires, prescribed fires, anything like that at all. After the fire, each I-button will give you data that look like these. So this is just temperature over time. What you can do is feed these data into the soil heating model, and it will calculate an equation that matches that curve. So that's what you see here with that blue line. If you do this for all 3 sensors in one I-button stake, you get a plot that looks like this, where each of those lines came from one of the sensors. And because there are 3 equations, the model is then able to calculate temperature over time for any other depth you're interested in based on the regressions it can make. So this is an example of that. You can see this is temperature over time or 2 to 10 centimeters deep. And once you're able to calculate temperature over time for any soil depth that you might be interested in, this opens up a whole range of possibilities for how to use this model. So to give you an idea of just a few of them, you can summarize the temperatures experienced by a range of soil depths. What you see here is the mean temperature for soil depths 5 to 10 centimeters, plus or minus a standard deviation. So you don't have to look at just one specific depth, you can actually look at a section of the soil profile and get an idea of the temperatures that it is experiencing during the fire. Another application that I think has a lot of potential is biological impact. So if you know certain thermal tolerances for an organism or a tissue type of interest, you can use the model to calculate survival of that organism or tissue type at different soil depths. For example, if you're interested in the seed bank and you want to get an idea of how many seeds are still viable at different depths after the fire, you can use the model to make those calculations, which would be really useful for certain restoration projects or predicting ecosystem recovery after a fire. Additional applications of the model are numerous. If you're interested in a particular temperature threshold or range of temperatures, you can calculate the time that the soil spends in that temperature range. You can look at how long it takes for the soil to heat or how long it takes it to cool, and so much more. The uses for this model are really only limited by the questions that people have. If it's related to soil temperature during fire, this model can definitely help. So to that end, the second part of my thesis is looking at linking soil temperature during fire to changes in below ground carbon, nitrogen, and microbial biomass post-fire. To answer this question, I have a case study at the Walker Fire, which burned last September in Plumas National Forest. By the standards of last summer, it was a pretty big fire at 55,000 acres. Each plot is a 30 by 30 meter square, and there are 3 soil sampling locations within each plot. As you can see from the map, the plots range from unburned to low severity to high severity locations. And I have samples from immediately before the fire, immediately after the fire, and then 1 month post-fire, 6 months post-fire, and 9 months post-fire. The soil properties in particular that I'm looking at are pH, microbial biomass, nitrogen in terms of both nitrate and ammonium, as well as total carbon to nitrogen ratios. The preliminary results are pretty interesting. Pre-fire, we see there's not a lot of significant differences between the plots, which is nice. It means that all of our different locations are starting from more or less the same condition. And then post-fire, see that the burned plots and the unburned plots are different. And this makes sense. Fire is a pretty major disturbance. But where it gets really interesting is that the magnitude and the direction of change for some of these soil properties is different depending on which plot you're in. And the way it breaks down largely is that the low severity plots are doing one thing, and the high severity plots are sometimes doing the exact opposite thing, which is wild. And of course begs the question, well then what is severity? And severity is a measure of the vegetation response to fire. So what you see here pictured on the left is a photo of one of our low severity plots. And you can see that the understory is pretty cleared out, but all of the trees are still alive. Versus the picture on the right here is one of our high severity plots, and all of the trees are dead. So but clearly different things were going on here. So where it gets a little more complicated is that vegetation response to fire does not always connect one-to-one with the below ground experience of fire. Because how the soil is affected by the heat and the fire depends on a lot of different factors, including the soil moisture at the time that it burns, the mineral content, soil structure. All of these things can cause differences. So one of the things we can do with the temperature data we have is move away from severity a little bit and more towards intensity, which is a measure of kind of the fire dose that an area experienced. These graphs that you see here are from these two plots, and it's temperature over time at 10 centimeters deep. So clearly these plots experienced fire very differently. And what we can do with this is try to use the more quantitative approach we have to pull apart some of those non-monotonic responses I mentioned earlier, where some plots are doing one thing and some plots are doing the opposite thing. By looking more towards intensity, I think we have the potential to start to understand why those responses have been so different. So I'm pretty excited about this all. The things we've got coming down the line. At the time of this recording, we are in the process of validating the soil heating model. So once that's all good to go, it'll be freely available on GitHub for anyone that's interested in using it. And then after that, we'll have the case study on the Walker fire, where I'll be looking at the fire effects using both pre and post-fire data on the wildfire, and then linking those fire effects with the soil temperature experienced during that fire. So there's some fun things going on here. I'm pretty excited about, and I look forward to hearing any questions or comments that you all may have. Thanks so much for listening.